The other reason Kent is comfortable calling me is because he knows I'm never bashful about sharing my opinion. As he said, I farm at Winkler, Minnesota, and our farm consists of 12,000 acres. We have about 8,500 acres that's actually tiled. I'm going to need a little light up here, I think. Maybe they can't see that. I can hold it here. Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about tiling. I'll start out with a few slides and then a little discussion, or a little talk, and then I'd like to have some questions from the one thing I want to say about tiling is this is from my perspective in my corner of the world. Conditions are different everywhere, I'm aware of that, and so something that I say might not sit square with you, and you're probably right that it wouldn't work in your area how I see it, but for the exposure I have, I'll give you the best that I can here. This is an aerial photo of, I'd say, late July. Kind of a typical look in an excess rainfall year in our area. It's very flat, similar to here. The difference between our area and here is we're next to the what you guys would call the bush, or we call the forest. So there's a lot more trees that we farm around in our fields and stuff than you guys would have. There's another picture. You can see all the places where the wheat turned white because it died, and summer fallow kind of towards the upper part there is all got water standing on it. This is actually 2013 untitled cornfield that's near my brother's farm, and you can see the water damage because we had some excess rainfall early in the summer. There's another photo from 2013, and you can see the checkerboard in the field because of the excess water. Now this is 1 mile away. You can see that quarter of corn there. There's not a spot out of it. And that's tiled. And here's another tiled field, three quarters, and just wall-to-wall corn. But it makes that much difference for us. Before we started tiling, it was whenever the discussion came up or you read about it in a farm magazine or anything, conventional wisdom in our area was it won't work here. It works in southern Minnesota, it won't work here. Our subsoil is too heavy, our outlets aren't deep enough, we don't grow high enough value crops. All of the things that is typical if you don't know what you're dealing with. We in 1998, 99 in the winter, we had a farm review done of our farm. The University of Minnesota was doing some. They brought a county extension person and a lender and adult ag instructor, and they did some things with looked at your financial operation, your production centers, your grain handling, all that, and made advice on your farm, what you could do to improve it. The two things came out of that review that we had done, and one of them that was we should employ broader genetics in our crop base. We were planting pretty much just one variety of wheat. We farmed 7,000 acres at that time. It was half wheat and half canola. And they thought that was too much to have in one variety. We did it for simplicity. The other thing was that we should start tiling, looking at drain tile, because when you looked at our income variability, we always liked to whine about the prices being poor, and that was, in the 90s, that was a big deal. But it turned out that our income variability was caused by yield variability, and we were losing too much crop to excess water. In the spring of '99, I made the decision to hire a contractor to tile 80 acres for us, and we chose an 80 that was not connected to anything else, so we weren't going to have issues with main sizing or anything. I went and talked to my lender. I wasn't asking for a mortgage for it, but I was going to take it out of my working capital, so I wanted him to be aware. And it was kind of foreign to him, so he called the bank president in there, and she sat and listened to my presentation, and she said, well, if you do enough that if it doesn't turn out for you, you can still handle it, why, go ahead. And so we did the first 80 acres. Planted the crop that spring. There was nothing abnormal about it. It was a spring tiling project that we had done. And the way the year worked out, we didn't have any big changes in yield between our tiled and our untiled ground. But it was a very wet fall. And so we had this 180 acres that you could combine and just drive up and down the field just like you envision when you think about harvesting wheat. And then we had the rest of our farm that we made ruts 1 to 2 feet deep from end to end, and we were parking trucks on the road and ferrying grain with cats and grain carts and dragging mud on the road to get, because we couldn't get a truck in the field. And prior to harvest that year, we were having coffee one day, and my dad said to me, I know you'd like to tile this farm, but you're going to have to get that out of your head. You'll never be able to pay for it. He said, it's just too expensive. At that time, he did most of our fall tillage work, or a lot of it. And that fall, when it was dry, he wanted to work that 80 every day, because it was the one field that you could go to and not fight. And I told him, you got to quit, it's going to blow away. It was pretty light soil, and I said, we won't have a field left there. So fast forward 3 years, and we're the same deal, having coffee one day, and he said, what are you planning to tile this year? I said, 2002 was not a very good year for me, and I probably won't tile anything. And at that time, I was renting about 3,500 acres from him. And he said, he didn't say any more, but the next day, he said to me, if I borrow some money and pay for some tile, will you increase the rent? And I said, well, of course, that's a win for me. I don't have to source the money, and I don't, if things go bad, I'm not on the hook for it. And he said, well, I'm 71 years old, and if I'm going to see this farm tiled, you can't take too many years off, and I want this farm tiled. So he actually borrowed money that year and tiled 1,300 acres in one fall. But we didn't have any competition at that time to get it done, because there was no one else. Everyone else had a bad year too that was farming. Since then, we've tiled a little bit every year. And we tile rented land as well as owned land. We structure our leases so that we think we're protected and the landowner is protected, and we give them some safety valves to get out of it if for some reason they get, anything can happen. Their children can want to farm, they can want to sell the farm, they can, one of my hired men could accidentally drive in their lawn and piss them off. Anything can happen. But, so I try to make it so that they don't feel like they're trapped in the lease, but still our interests are protected. Some benefits that I see, production increases are hard to measure on an individual field, because you're always comparing, there's so many other variables. But if you look at your whole farm average, your tile ground gains you a lot, because you're more timely with your operations and you don't have those spotted crop losses that we were looking for up here and stuff. The other thing is that your yield increases come from better timing. You can do things when you need to do them. The big win for me as the coordinator of scheduling and stuff, how everything gets done, is just the timeliness and the ability to do. We farm across about 35 acres, and when you go to an area, if you got to leave 10 rods wide along the woods or something, and then think you're going to get back there when it's dried out, you never get there. And if you do, you're 3 weeks behind, then you're behind at harvest, so it's still, you either combine it green or you don't combine it, and the timing's wrong for spraying. So we really appreciate the value of the tile in terms of getting our work done when we need to. And we get by on about, we think 50% of the machinery investment that we would need if we didn't have tile. Because we can just have that much, we can get that much more done with each piece of machinery. We seed 24 hours a day, always, and when we tried that before we had tile, we were stuck. You know, you'd always end up stuck somewhere because there's one little spot that you can't see in the dark. The soil qualities are a lot nicer on the tiled ground, especially after a few years it gets mellow and loose. It's not a little bit of loose dirt on top of a hockey puck. Spraying is nice. You don't get all the ruts in your soybean fields. You can makes the harvest go a lot better for spraying or from your spraying. In the U.S. at least, we have been getting tax law favorability for tiling. We've had rapid depreciations. You could write it all off right away. And so if you had the income to support it, you didn't have to pay half in taxes first. You could use the whole works for tiling. And then the other thing I like is tile retains its value, and we think it goes up with inflation in land and the general economy. So that if we got land that costs us $150 an acre to tile, that now is, probably the tiling is worth $800 underneath the land, and the value of the tile has not depreciated. It's just as useful today as it was when we put it in there, and it's just as saleable as if it was done yesterday. Some obstacles. The number one obstacle that most people would say is cost. That's a big deal. Another obstacle is how do you finance it on rented land if you don't have the working capital to just put into it. We got regulations, of course, about tiling, and they're getting to be more all the time. Watershed district regulations, USDA regulations, so that's always a process you got to work through. We've been always pretty fortunate in that we could decide to tile a field and pretty much get it tiled right away. We didn't have any regulatory reasons why we had to wait. As long as it didn't have a wetland on it, we had to have the determination done. But now they're going to back that up. It almost looks like you'll have to plan a year in advance and to get all your permits and stuff. Neighbors can be an issue. Perception that you're manufacturing water underneath the ground there and pumping it into the drainage system and causing problems for a neighbor. That perception is there, and you have to deal with that. And our experience is that outflows from the tile are longer, but they're less in the peak. So you don't contribute to anyone's flood. You don't make their flood worse, let's put it that way. Some things to think about. Don't outlet your tile immediately upstream from your neighbor's well-groomed yard. Especially if he mows up the ditch bank to the edge of the road and stuff. You'll have cattails in a ditch, and he'll never be able to mow without ruts, and it'll cause it'll cause PR problems for you. And there's ways around it, but you just want to be conscious of that. The other thing we like to do is put in erosion-proof outlets, so you don't have blowouts around your outlet, because it's not good for the drainage system, and doesn't look good to have that big washout, right? Either if it's gravity or pumped, it doesn't really matter. You'll get a washout. Another thing we don't do is, we started out doing this, but we don't do it anymore, is running every lateral into a drainage system individually. We use a collector main on the end and just dump in 1 or 2 spots, because it's a maintenance nightmare for the drainage system if they're going to do something with the ditch. They got to work around every one of those little pipes, or else they got to cut them off when they clean the ditch and you got to fix them again. So we try to avoid that. And one other thing we've learned is when we tile a field, we do not tile spots. We try to we made a conscious decision when we started. We want to do it so we're not back there again in 5 years doing it over or adding. I won't say that's never happened, because sometimes you have a spot that you just don't get to your liking. But we try to do the whole field as part of a comprehensive plan, as opposed to thinking we can get by with tiling a draw or a wet spot, and then it just turns out to be inadequate. It's been our experience. And that's basically all I have. I'd like to find out from you guys what, they started out the presentation, we didn't say this, but at home, the qualification to be an expert is you got to be 25 miles from home, so no one really knows what you've been doing. And I got that here, so. Anybody got any questions? Yes, sir.
Did you ever look into purchasing your own tiling equipment?
Yep.
What prevented it? Or did you buy your own?
I actually did, but my experience is that unless you're gonna put the whole crew together and manage that as another enterprise, that no one has that kind of spare time for that many people, and you end up with a line of machinery that ends up being furniture, almost. I know lots of guys that have bought it and never really used it. It just sits. And then not only that, but they always have a couple semi-loads of tile sitting somewhere that they were gonna put in, that the mice are eating holes in the bottom of the roll. So, it's not rocket science. Anybody can figure it out, but there's a learning curve, and there's a huge commitment of time and management. It's another business. And my other experience is that the tiling contractors, when you look at what they invest and what they have in labor and infrastructure, that they're making an honest profit for their work, but they're not printing money. Yes, sir.
Tile drainage versus surface drainage. When do you prefer one or the other, or do you need both together, or what's your comments on that?
The question was tile drainage versus surface drainage. In our area, our opinion is that you need your surface drainage pretty well perfected before you start tile drainage. You can substitute tile drainage for surface drainage by putting your tiles closer together to a point. But some of those flat basins, you just can't get the water through the soil profile fast enough to not damage your crop. It's my opinion that in 72 hours of saturation, you've damaged your crop, so you need to avoid that. You need to get your excess water moved off the soil before 72 hours are up, or you're going to have damage. Sir?
How far apart do you have your tiles?
How far apart are the tiles was the question, and our very furthest ones are 130 feet, and that's in some gravel. It's got a gravel lens. The rest of our soil, we probably are pretty consistently now at about 60 to 75 feet. We did some early work at 100. We've actually done some little spots as narrow as 35. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to know, who do you rely on to design your drainage field and who makes your plan? Do you have lots to do with it, or do you rely on a program or a company, or who does that for you?
Actually, the contractors have their people that do the layout, and there's some good resources available to us in terms of soil types and drainage guides. And then, anybody who's farmed the land is going to want to be part of that planning process, at least in some point, because you always got your spot that is an issue for one reason or another that the person that's designing it might not know without having that on-the-field experience. But we try to design for 3/8 of an inch drainage coefficient for the crops that we're growing. And we have probably 2/3 or maybe 3/4 of ours is pumped outlet, and the remainder would be gravity. We only have a few spots where gravity will work for us. Yes?
I just wanted to comment on this, about the surface drainage and the focus tile. Those cornfields that have the groundouts on, that was my neighbor, and he had gone over those for the John Deere GPS system in the fall of 2011. He did every quarter, he went all over them with that John Deere GPS. And I haven't been on my field since about 2006 with the tractor sprayer. But mine were tiled and they hit those ones.
That is a good point, and in response to your question, the tile drainage reduces the amount of maintenance you need to do on your surface drainage by a lot. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How deep do you usually go?
How deep are the tiles? That was the question. How deep are the tiles? 3 to 6 feet. Except some mains sometimes, if you're in flat fields, some of your mains will be dug in maybe 10 feet deep with an excavator. Because you have to get that deep or you come out of the ground on the other end. Yes, sir.
Do you use gates to retain water at certain times of growing season?
We do not. The question was, do we use gates to control the water level? And we do not. There is a push coming now from University or North Dakota State University and the University of Minnesota to look at that. It adds some to the cost. The pumps, of course, that's easy. You can just shut the pump off. It changes the design of your system some, so it would add some cost to it, but it is workable. There's some watersheds in the area now, and including ours, I think in the future, where you're going to have a shut off in the end even of your gravity outlets so that you can shut them off during a flood. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So what, it's hard to prove it, I guess, but so what is the yield increase wheat and soybeans you reckon over time? Average.
I'm going to say 15 bushel on wheat, and soybeans, well, this is more of a guess, but maybe 5 on soybeans. So water and soybeans is such a timing thing. If it's early in the year, they can withstand a lot of water and they still turn out fine. They branch out and compensate for the loss of stand. But if you have excess water when after they start blooming, they're not as sad as canola, but they don't like it very good. They're putting too much of their energy into reproduction and they can't stand the stress. So you get more gain if the wetness comes late in the season than if it comes early.
And that's in addition to stabilize your yield, and then all the efficiencies you get with field work.
Right. We all try to want to look at the monetary side of it, and we need to, but actually the peace of mind that comes with having your farm tiled is for me at least, is more comforting than the yield increase. Just not fighting that mud all the time, not dragging the log chain to pull your combine out, not just getting rid of the struggle. We always spray our untiled fields first if it's dry, because we know if it rains we can get back on the tiled ones, but the untiled ones maybe not without fighting. So, I mean, it changes your management approach. Anyone else? Oh, yes, sir.
Is there any maintenance on the tile once you put it in? Do you have to redo it after a number of years?
Very little. No, I wouldn't say you're ever gonna have to redo it unless it's installed improperly. Or maybe that you wanna do some irrigation with it or something, and you just have to change the design for that reason, but if it's gonna plug, it'll normally plug the first week if it's getting dirty in somewhere. And, you know, we've fallen in a trench with a sprayer and fell in so far that it pinched the tile when it was only maybe 2.5 feet down. You know, some odd things like that have happened. So I wouldn't say there's no maintenance, but there isn't much maintenance. It's not like surface drainage. Anything else? All right. Oh, yes.
You said you had mainly pumped out of that system that hasn't required a fair bit of maintenance, like the pumps and that kind of thing?
Well, that's been evolutionary. Some of the early pumps we had were what I would call a tower pump, electric motor on top, drive shaft to the bottom. There's some issues there with bearings and bushings and not something as miserable as a roller chain or anything like that, but there's some issues. But the newer one, the stainless steel submersible pumps with VFD drives that we use now have just been basically bulletproof.
Like frost hasn't been an issue in winter, over winters and that kind of thing?
Well, it hasn't been to us, but I use floating stock tank heaters in my wells.
Okay.
And I started that practice back when, for our monthly minimum for our power bill, we got so many kilowatts of power. And the pumps aren't running in the winter, at least not, I don't put heat in them till after the first of the year. Typically, they're done cycling then. So it didn't cost me anything to have the heat in there. Just the effort of putting it in there. Well then, now they changed our setup so you pay for all your power, but I've never had the courage to just not put heat in and see what happens. It's too much investment. Here you go, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Todd. Thanks a lot for your...